Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're diving into a striking, almost unbelievable symbol of global overconsumption. Right now, in one of the driest places on Earth, Chile's Atacama Desert, sits a massive, sprawling mountain of discarded clothing. It's a visual representation of a global crisis that starts right in our very own closets and ends out in the desert sand.
Here's what we're looking at today: the mountain from space, how all these clothes actually get to the desert, the fast fashion factor, the toxic reality on the ground, and finally, whether or not we can actually clean this up.
All right, part one, the mountain from space and a hidden environmental cost that's, well, not so hidden anymore.
60,000. That's how many tons of discarded clothing arrive in this region every single year. It is completely mind-boggling. We're talking about a pile so ridiculously massive, you can literally see it from space. Satellites are picking up these huge patches of our old clothes sitting right there in the middle of the natural desert. Talk about a wake-up call for our modern shopping habits, right?
Moving on to part two, let's trace this journey to the desert and see exactly how all these global clothes end up in Chile. So, how does a t-shirt get here? Well, Chile has become one of the biggest entry points in the entire world for used clothes. It all starts at the northern port of Iquique. It's a free trade zone, which basically means importing stuff is super straightforward. Traders get these huge bales of clothes, they sort them and they grade them to resell all over Latin America, hitting markets that really need affordable secondhand fashion. But here's the catch. What happens to the stuff nobody wants? The damaged, outdated, or just really poor quality items? Getting rid of them properly actually costs money. So to dodge those disposal fees, tons of this unsold surplus just gets illegally dumped in the desert right outside the city of Alto Hospicio.
And get this, the clothes aren't just coming from next door. Those 60,000 tons are flooding in mostly from Europe, the US, Canada, and parts of Asia. Basically, this is an inherited nightmare for northern Chile. We're talking about waste created by consumers thousands of miles away, maybe even you and me, that ultimately just becomes this massive local burden for the Chilean desert.
Which brings us to section three, the fast fashion catalyst, and what I like to call the illusion of donation. If you actually go out to these dumping areas in Alto Hospicio, you're not just looking at unwearable, threadbare rags. We're talking perfectly good winter coats, sportswear, kids' clothes, shoes. And here is the kicker. A crazy amount of these garments still have their original price tags attached. No way, right? It means a huge chunk of this mountain is made up of clothes that literally no one ever even wore before they got tossed into the global secondhand market. So here's a pretty harsh reality check. Just because you drop something in a donation bin doesn't guarantee it gets reused. These textiles get fed into this massive, complex international sorting network. Sure, the premium stuff gets sold locally or exported for a good price, but the lower quality pieces, they just get pushed down the chain, filtering through country after country until they hit weaker markets. And if nobody there wants to buy them, well, they aren't a donation anymore. They instantly become commercial waste.
Now, the real culprit behind all this excess? Fast fashion, for sure. Think about it. Traditional fashion used to stick to seasonal schedules, using higher quality materials that were actually meant to last. But today's fast fashion model is a whole different beast. It's all about year-round collections, hyper-fast online retail, and rock-bottom production costs. We're basically trained to buy more frequently and toss things out after wearing them maybe once or twice. So when this absolute flood of cheap clothing hits the recycling and resale systems, the global market just completely chokes. It just cannot absorb the sheer volume of it.
All right, part four, let's look at the toxic decay and the human cost. What is the actual ground level impact here? The core of the environmental issue really comes down to the fabric itself. See, natural fibers like cotton or wool, they'll naturally biodegrade over time. But modern fast fashion, it is absolutely packed with polyester and synthetic, petroleum-derived fabrics, basically plastics. So when you dump a mountain of this stuff out in the Atacama, it doesn't just naturally fade away. It sits there, totally intact for decades.
And leaving it out in the elements triggers this sequential environmental nightmare. It happens in stages. First, literally within days, the desert wind picks up loose synthetic fibers and scatters them everywhere. Then, over the course of months, that intense UV sunlight starts baking the clothes, breaking them down into polluting microplastics. Finally, over the years, as a desperate attempt to manage the growing piles, people actually set them on fire. And remember, these are petroleum-based textiles. So when they burn, they are releasing highly hazardous toxic compounds straight into the air.
Which brings us to the very real human cost. For folks living in the nearby town of Alto Hospicio, this isn't some abstract documentary topic. It's their daily life. That toxic smoke we just talked about, it regularly forces residents to literally lock themselves indoors just to breathe. Meanwhile, local authorities are dealing with an impossible situation, trying to police these vast, empty desert access roads to stop the illegal dumping. On top of that, the local municipalities are slapped with massive cleanup bills for commercial waste they didn't even generate. And naturally, everybody argues over who should pay for it because it's imported commercial waste, not local household trash.
So that leads us to our final section, part 5. Can we actually clean this up? Let's talk about recycling and changing laws.
Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There are some genuinely brilliant initiatives out there trying to tackle this mess. We've got organizations figuring out how to mechanically separate these fabrics, basically shredding them back down into raw fibers. Then, they take those fibers and turn them into industrial materials, stuff like insulation and felt. People are stuffing furniture, mattresses, and even car parts with our discarded clothes. Some really cool projects are even testing out ways to make solid building panels and acoustic soundproofing right out of this textile waste.
But, and there's always a but, doing this at scale is incredibly tricky. Why? Because modern clothes are almost never just one material. They are a chaotic blend of mixed fibers and different chemical treatments. So while our recycling capacity is definitely inching upward, processing these complex fabrics is highly technical. And when you're staring down a decades-old backlog of waste sitting in the desert, it is an absolutely massive cleanup task. Because cleaning up the desert is so daunting, Chile is trying to cut the problem off at the source using the law. They're rolling out a framework called Extended Producer Responsibility. Basically, this flips the script. Now, the clothing producers, the retailers, and the importers who bring this stuff into the country are the ones expected to organize and pay for the collection and disposal systems. Plus, environmental courts are finally stepping in, dropping legal orders to force better waste management and demanding actual long-term environmental restoration in the affected areas. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. This whole Atacama clothing mountain is just the most visible part of a massive global chain. For most of us, dropping a garbage bag full of old shirts into a donation bin feels like a huge win, right? It feels like the final, responsible step. But as we've just seen, it's often just day one of a journey that spans thousands of miles. So next time you're doing a closet cleanout, ask yourself, where are your discarded clothes actually going to end up? Thanks so much for joining me today to explore this complex and totally vital topic. Keep asking those tough questions, and I'll see you in the next explainer.